my viewers, and welcome to today's video where we take a look into a candid discussion on the dark side of palm color culture, that's if we can even call it culture, and its pervasive influence on society. Now, in a series of videos, different palm color individuals confront the uncomfortable truth surrounding palm color culture, challenging the notion of its existence as a benign cultural identity. Now, as one palm color man aptly points out, palm color culture is not merely a set of traditions or customs, but rather a complex power structure and ideology rooted in WS. This sentiment is echoed by another palm color woman who highlights how palm color culture has historically perpetuated oppressive systems that continue to marginalize Black people and people of color. Indeed, palm color culture has been implicated in the creation and maintenance of R-to-the-6 narratives that justify colonialism, slavery, and systemic discrimination. Now, by examining the origins of these narratives, we can gain insight into the ways in which palm color culture has shaped societal norms and perpetuated inequalities. With that said, check out these videos. I will be right back.
So white culture exists, but it is not a culture as such. It's a power structure, an ideology. It's white supremacy, the will to power, the desire to be the universal subject, to be default, neutral, to be considered merely human without having to hyphenate or qualify. Now, the problem is occupying that neutral default position doesn't really lend itself to the sorts of idiosyncrasies and particularities that we associate with culture. Not only that, it leads you to the denial of that sort of specificity. Think of the way that transphobes like to claim that they don't have pronouns. Now, of course, white people have cultures. They have regional, national, linguistic communities that they belong to. But that is very different from saying that they have a white culture. And in fact, those individual cultures do a lot of work to undermine the idea of white culture and white supremacy. Because if you call yourself, for instance, an Irish American, you're weakening your claim to being only American. You've now joined the long list of people with hyphenated identities. And I would add one last point, something else that is missing from that general category of white culture, which is a claim to injury. So the sociologist Wendy Brown, in her book States of Injury, describes how identity categories tend to be formed in response to some sort of harm. A group of people is oppressed, they form a community in response, and then name themselves. And that series of acts is the formation of a culture. But white culture has never had that experience. We share no common experience of oppression or victimization because of our race, which goes a long way to explaining why it is that we say something provocative like white culture doesn't exist, because it is a very different animal.
You have got to know that is not the flex you think it is. And you're absolutely right. White culture did create the oppressive system that people like Auntie Wiggs and the BIPOC community, unfortunately, are still struggling under. White culture, it's not a thing, didn't create a good world for them to live in. White culture created a barbaric system that has been railing against them for over 400 years. White culture needs to be dismantled because white culture is white supremacy. White culture is genocide and murder, rape, brutality, spreading disease, colonizing. And you're proud of that?
White culture, if you could even call it culture, is based in racism. It was a narrative created by colonizers, like my Portuguese ancestors, in order to justify what they were doing to other people on the continent of Africa and even here in North America. And the narrative was that we white people were better than all other races. And they did so through Christianity. They took the Bible and different scripture verses, twisted it around in order to fit the narrative of colonialism and white supremacy, and also the patriarchy. And the patriarchy is white man in power. White supremacy is white man in power. Colonialism is white man in power, and Christianity, for the most part nowadays, is white man in power. There are historical references and proof where the Catholic Church actually said to enslave an African was to save their soul. The kidnapped and enslaved Africans that were here in North America were preached different scripture verses than were actually in the Bible. And that's why they weren't allowed to read. Because if they could read, then they could see that these scripture verses were incorrect and they couldn't be controlled anymore by this white God. And white people, we didn't identify as white until colonialism. We identified as Portuguese, or Latvian, or German, or Italian, or French. But then colonialism came around, and then all of a sudden we became white and we were superior because we were the chosen race by God, and the scripture verses proved it. And we had to go into other people's lands and preach the gospel when really it was all a ruse. It was all an excuse to go in and rape and pillage the land and the people and the cultures. So when I say that white culture is based in racism, it's based in racism. Christianity was the Trojan horse of white supremacy and colonialism. And Western Christianity, as we know today, is still based within superiority. All Christians think that they're better than everybody else. I grew up in it. I'm very familiar with the culture. And it's part of the problem. There's a reason why most of Trump's supporters are Christians. It's because they don't even realize that the conditioning of colonialism and Christianity and the patriarchy is so deeply embedded within them and their identity that they don't even see the truth. Christianity is based in superiority, in white superiority, in white culture, which is all based in racism.
On today's edition with Lady Bedazzled Hannah, I will be answering your question, what is white culture?
Hit me with it.
The wording of white culture is a broad term that I use that umbrellas the many diversities within us white skin-toned people.
So we're off to a rocky start because the category white has never been inclusive of all of the people in the world with the lightest skin tones. Racial categories are and have always been first and foremost political. And even services like this, which will readily admit that their estimates, their guesses, are sort of a post hoc attempt to apply a thin veneer of science to race, which is exactly what she's also trying to do here by making it about skin, when it is and has always been about so much more.
And I think the same can be said of other ethnicities, because with brown culture, red culture, yellow culture, black culture, as well as white culture.
I've literally never heard anyone say red culture, yellow culture, or brown culture before. This sounds like the categories of scientific racism, but with the word culture slapped on the end. The creation of scientific racism is usually credited to the 18th century scientist Carl Linnaeus, the father of modern taxonomy. And Linnaeus divided us into 4 different varieties, which you can see he assigned colors to. And his work was built on by scientists like Johann Blumenbach, the father of racial classification. Blumenbach gave us the now familiar 5 races, 4 of which were degenerate forms of the original due to things like environmental factors, and I'll give you one guess which one he thought was the original. And I could summarize the work of more racist scientists here, but I think the point is pretty clear. These categories were created in service of white supremacy. No, black culture is absolutely a term that people use. And I think that this is a good excuse to bring up something that the writer, sociologist, and activist W.E.B. Du Bois once wrote. Namely that the only American music exists because of black folks. Popular music genres that we readily associate today with white culture, like country, rock and roll, we don't have them if we don't have black culture. So whatever your definition of white culture is, it better include cultural appropriation.
So to me, white culture is industrialism, cultivation, intelligence, cleanliness, order, generosity, and so much more.
Which sounds an awful lot like capitalism and colonialism. So if you were trying to demonstrate that white culture is in fact white supremacy, congrats, I think you did it.
Alright, now, the assertion that palm color culture is not merely a collection of benign traditions, but rather a power structure and ideology rooted in WS is supported by historical evidence and sociological analysis. Throughout history, palm color culture has been associated with notions of superiority and entitlement, leading to the marginalization and oppression of marginalized communities. The acknowledgement that palm color culture has historically perpetuated oppressive systems such as colonialism and slavery aligns with established historical narratives. Now, these systems were not only created but also upheld by palm color individuals who benefited from the exploitation and subjugation of others. The recognition that palm color culture is based on art-the-cis narratives that justify inequalities and injustices is crucial for understanding the systemic nature of articism. Now, these narratives were crafted by colonizers to justify their actions and maintain their dominance over indigenous people and people of color. By affirming perspectives of these palm color individuals, we validate the importance of self-awareness and critical reflection within palm color communities. Now, it is incumbent upon palm color individuals to confront the uncomfortable truths of their culture's history and actively work towards dismantling systems of oppression. These videos serves as a call to action, especially for palm color people, urging palm color people to challenge the narratives of WS and work towards creating a more equitable and inclusive society. Historically, the concept of palm color culture has been intertwined with notions of dominance, privilege, and control. From the colonial era to the present day, palm color culture has been associated with the imposition of Western values and norms on non-palm color societies, often at the expense of indigenous cultures and traditions. Moreover, the legacy of slavery, segregation, and systemic articism has left a profound mark on palm color culture, shaping attitudes and behaviors towards Black people and people of color. The perpetuation of stereotypes, discrimination, and microaggressions within palm color communities reflects the deep-seated influence of palm color supremacist ideology. Now, sociologically, palm color culture operates within a framework of social hierarchies and power dynamics that privilege palm-coloredness over other racial identities. This systemic privileging of palm-colored individuals and institutions perpetuates inequalities in areas such as education, employment, housing, and criminal justice. The concept of palm color culture is not monolithic, but intersects with other identities as gender, class, and sexuality. Intersectional analysis reveal how individuals may experience palm color culture differently based on their intersecting identities and positions within society. Now, this videos underscores the importance of acknowledging the complicity of palm color individuals in perpetuating systems of oppression and privilege. By confronting the uncomfortable truths of palm color culture and actively working towards dismantling systemic injustices, palm color individuals can contribute to meaningful social change. Now, palm coloredness and palm color racialized identity refer to the way that palm color people, their customs, culture, and beliefs operate as the standard by which all other groups are compared. Palm-coloredness is also at the core of understanding race in America. Palm-coloredness and the normalization of palm-color racial identity throughout America's history have created a culture where non-palm color persons are seen as inferior or abnormal. Now, this palm color dominant culture also operates as a social mechanism that grants advantages to palm color people. Since they can navigate society both by feeling normal and being viewed as normal, persons who identify as palm color rarely have to think about their racial identity because they live within a culture where palm coloredness has been normalized. Now, thinking about race is very different for non-palm color persons living in America. People of color and Black people must always consider their racial identity, whatever the situation, due to the systemic and interpersonal articism that still exists. Palm-coloredness and its accepted normality also exists as everyday microaggressions toward Black people and people of color. Acts of microaggressions include verbal, non-verbal, and environmental slight snubs or insults towards non-palm color people, whether intentional or not. These attitudes communicate hostile, derogatory, or harmful messages. Now, we need to be honest about the ways palm color people have benefited from articism so that we can work toward an equitable, fair, and just society. In WP, Unpacking the invisible knapsack, scholar Peggy McIntosh writes, palm color privilege is like an invisible weightless knapsack of spatial provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. Now here are some examples she gives on what palm color privilege looks like in a day-to-day living. I wish arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. I can avoid spending time with people whom I was trained to mistrust and who have learned to mistrust my kind or me. If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and in which I would want to live. Now there's so many examples that she gives, all to show how this system benefits palm color people alone. Now when it comes to palm color dominant culture, this describes how palm color people and their practices, beliefs, and culture have been normalized over time and are now considered standard in the United States. As a result, all Americans have all adopted various aspects of palm color culture, including people of color that are forced to adopt this. Now, WS is an ideology where palm color people are believed to be superior to non-palm color people. This fallacy is rooted in the same scientific articism and pseudoscience used to justify slavery, imperialism, colonialism, and genocide at various times throughout history. Palm color supremacist ideologies and their followers continue to perpetuate the myth of palm color racial superiority. Now, the belief of palm color superiority has been part of the United States since its inception. The palm color European imperialists who settled here believed they were inherently superior to non-palm color groups. These beliefs justified atrocities like the genocide of Native Americans and nearly 250 years of African slavery. After slavery, palm color supremacist ideologies manifested into a series of laws that would limit the freedom of Black Americans, known as Black Codes and Jim Crow. Palm color supremacy and its legacy can still be found in the legal system and other institutions through coded language and targeted practices. Direct and violent forms of articism that promote WS have been on the rise in recent years. Now, these acts are more directly linked to palm color nationalism. Palm color nationalism is a concept born out of WS. A key difference is a focus on nationhood. Palm color nationalists in the United States advocate for a country that is only for the palm color race due to feelings of entitlement and racial superiority. Now, they also believe that diversity of people in the United States will lead to the destruction of palm coloredness and palm color culture. Hence, the correlation to palm color supremacist ideology. Now, we can go on and on and on. But this culture is articism and is perpetuated by deeming palm coloredness as superior and other racial and ethnic groups as inferior. We have finally come to the end of the video. Share your thoughts as well in the comment section. Thank you for watching and see you in my next video.